first off, thank you all for joining. Honestly, when I saw the panel and once that was finalized, I was just taken aback by the two expertise within today's panel. Truly, I think three people who are in their field, one of the best. Yet I think today it will be a great time to first get to know you, get to know what you've built this far, and how we can, look at national security going forward. So first, I'll give a brief bio of myself. So I'm an economist, and I've worked together with the network, the National Security Academy, and me and Dexter had the privilege to work together for the past year or so. And he's a friend, he's a mentor, he's just a great human. And in my free time, I like to analyze economic development. I also worked in the field of private equity, and I was part of the Federal Reserve National Competition, where I analyzed monetary policy and economic strategy. And today I'm also joined with my other moderator, which is Ethan. Ethan, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Ethan Burk. I'm the Sycamore National Podcast Director. I've been writing for Sycamore for about 2 years now, and I'm hoping to continue next year.
Yes, so me and Ethan both have the privilege to be joined with you. I'll first as well give a quick bio on the three of the panelists that are joined with us today. First, again, my dear friend Dexter Ingram. This bio makes him sound, like a superhero. So he's the founder of the network. He's dedicated to guiding youth towards careers in national security. Over, honestly, his extensive career within the State Department, Dexter had some roles, including the director of the Office of Countering Violent Extremism, acting director of the Office of the Special Envoy to defeat ISIS, senior Counter Terrorism Coordinator for INTERPOL in Lyon, France, senior political advisor in Helmand, Afghanistan, Deputy Director of the Office of Preventing Weapons of Mass Destruction Terrorism, and as a senior liaison to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. And as well, obviously, he's worked within the Office of Countering Violent Extremism as well. So Dexter, I'm very happy to be joined with you today, and I think everyone listening can learn a lot from you. So it's very nice to speak to you. Our second panelist his name is David Lyon, and David Lyon is a global security and intelligence executive specializing in human risk, intelligence operations, and geopolitical strategy. So very interesting, I think. And he served for over a decade as an intelligence operative within the CIA Directorate of Operations, completing multiple overseas field tours. He's trained in human behavioral analysis. I mean, that is something I think we can all learn from. He assessed individuals for high stakes operations within life or death consequences. In addition, he served as the US Navy intelligence officer and later as the assistant country director for China within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Again, a person's bio which is truly incredible. David, I'm just taken aback by this, and I'm very happy to share this conversation with you today. And then Karen Schaefer. So Karen Schaefer is a former senior CIA and FBI executive with 26 years of experience with intelligence and national security. She has held some key roles across Latin America, Europe, Afghanistan, and Iraq. She also served as chief of base, very interesting. At the CIA headquarters, she led divisions in countering intelligence, military affairs, and science and technology. She also directed the intelligence programs at the National Security Council and conducted her career as the Associate Executive Assistant Director of the FBI's National Security Branch, serving as the Director, Senior CIA Representative. Look, we've heard these three amazing bios. So first, I just want to say hello, and if you guys quickly want to say something, that'd be great as well.
Ladies first. I mentioned off camera before we kicked this off that I can't pass up an opportunity to speak at one of these Sycamore functions because it was one of the first projects I became involved in post-retirement. There is life after work in government. I'm happy to say that I get an opportunity to do a lot of mentoring. I still think national security is the great, regardless of where you land within the national security apparatus, I still think it's the greatest place to make a difference and make an impact and serve your country. So I'm excited about our conversation today, and I promise not to pull any punches. And as I have told lots of other groups that I've been speaking with, lots of my comments will be political, but they will not be partisan.
I like it. David?
Sure. Thanks, Dexter. Thanks, everybody, for the very warm intros. Like Karen, I really enjoy mentoring, and I started my career at the CIA right after college. And there's a lot of benefits, and then there's some negatives to that. But I really support any chance that anyone has to have one of these sort of events, because it's important that people who are considering a career in national security understand where they might fit in best, because then you're going to be happiest and then you're going to make the biggest contribution to the country. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I look forward to our discussion. Thanks.
And yeah, hi, I'm Dexter. Super excited to be here. It's kind of great for me because I get to work with the Sycamore Institute as well as In Network, which is an organization I founded. And what I really love is, there's zero competition. There's so much synergy, so many people wanting to help. And that's what we're seeing across the board. I think there's a lot of things to talk about right now. I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm still the only one who's a Fed. So I'm looking forward to hearing what David and Karen have to say.
Very good. So I would say we should start off with the first question. This one is directed to the general U3, right? So I would say let's start off broad. Each of you has served at high levels of government within different fields, but still connected within the umbrella of national security. What's the biggest shift you've seen in how national security threats are identified and managed today? Dexter, why not start with you?
Yes, like I said, I'm the political. No, I'm not the political. I'm the Fed right now. See, that shows where my mind's going. It's interesting when you mention that. I look at how things I think most of us started at the very end of the Cold War. So the world was different then. We had, us, Soviet Union. There was the Cold War mentality, especially when it came to intelligence. And then in the 90s, you had, the Gulf War. You had, I guess for me, I look at it, I was in college during the Gulf War, and then I was out in the mid 90s, got to fly airplanes for a while. 9/11 happened and the whole world changed. I mean, the way the world was before 9/11, the way it is after 9/11, very different. I mean, you used to be able to drive your car in front of the White House. We didn't have a Department of Homeland Security. We didn't have a National Counter Terrorism Center. We didn't have a lot of these organizations. And then looking today at the current administration, it's made another, pretty big jump. A lot of times we were spending a lot of money on foreign aid all around the world. Some of it was going to really good use, and some of it, probably could have been looked at spending a little better. What I see now today is we're more focused only on what's happening to the homeland. And I get that. We want to protect our people. A nation's job is to secure its people, right? Safety is really important. But that role we played with other countries isn't the same at this point in time. I think we're looking at other countries to take on a bigger burden, especially when it comes to parts of the world that don't directly influence the threat that could affect the homeland. So, we've seen some changes from the Cold War to like the 90s, post 9/11, and then just the last few months, to be very honest.
David, it'd be great if you could answer next.
Sure. Three points regarding the biggest shifts. The first is, Dexter, I love what you said, protecting the homeland. Yes, I mean, I joined the CIA, which is a very obviously foreign-facing agency, but I have seen more and more, and for good reason, efforts to protect the homeland. And I want to say that's very, very important, especially from threats within, domestic threats as well. And that's something that, you know, what we were constantly afraid of at the CIA were domestic threats that had a foreign nexus. So very, very important. And I see that has sort of ebbed and flowed. And I hope that there continues to be sort of a focus there. The next is, again, as Dexter mentioned, strategic versus maybe more tactical. When I joined, the Cold War was over. China was becoming the next enemy, or the main next enemy. Lots of emphasis on strategic competition with China. Then 9/11 happened, and like everything changed. I joined as a China operations officer. That was my reason that I joined, really to fight the Chinese. And I was happily doing that, and then 9/11 happened. And then the whole agency redirected resources to counterterrorism, which was necessary. But what I've seen lately is we're sort of going back to that as well. And then the last point I'll make quickly is the CIA and the FBI have a love-hate relationship in some ways. But I have to say, when it started, I think it was quite bad. When I started working, it wasn't good. But over the course of my career, it couldn't have gotten any better. It was a wonderful, strong, robust, meaningful relationship. And hopefully that has continued. I've been out for a little while, but hopefully that has continued. So anyway, I see that change as being a very, very positive thing. And one of the things I always mention at a talk like this is I had a great fortune of working very closely with the FBI and other law enforcement, and at the working operational level on operations. And you know, that created friendships, of course, but institutional strength all around. And that's a wonderful path forward. That's all for me. Thanks, Karen.
Well, I think we've talked a lot about the points that I would have hit on. I think we have done a pretty significant realignment. I would say even prior to the transition to this administration, we really started to move away from that counterterrorism only focus and started to recognize the broader threats that in particular China and Russia represented to the United States, particularly vis-a-vis the havoc they were wreaking internally, vis-a-vis cyber threats, cyber attacks, disinformation attacks, influencing elections, etc. So I think there's absolutely been a shift in that direction. I would say with this new administration, the largest observation I can see with respect, because you're still going to have the national security apparatus, and they're still focused on the Chinas, the Russias, the North Koreas, the Irans. What I would say is that I think some of that machinery has been cut out of the decision-making process. And I think it has become much more centralized in the executive office in a way that previously our foreign policy and our policy direction has not been so centralized in a core few of individual people. So that's the first observation I would make. The second observation I would make is that we are absolutely going much more away from, and I think, you know, I can't remember which one of you all made this point, but about focusing inward. I think we are definitely taking a much more unilateral approach to national strategic threats. In the past, the United States never chose to go it alone in virtually any scenario. It didn't matter what it was. We would go to the UN, we would engage our partners, and in particular, we relied tremendously, for good reason, on our alliance with NATO because we shared common belief systems, common forms of government, and supported the same democratic ideals and wanted to promote those elsewhere in the world. There's been a pretty significant shift in that dynamic. And I don't need to tell you all because you see it every single day. There's been significant rupture with a lot of our closest partners. The third thing that I would say is the most interesting and not the most interesting or surprising, but is also our move away from soft power. The United States, one of the ways in which we have been incredibly effective in securing the homeland is through soft power, whether it is supporting vaccinations in Africa or, water purification, you name it, yes. Have there been misappropriations of funds? Has there been, have some of these projects gone askew? Absolutely. But I am saddened to see the loss of what I would consider one of the most important tools that we could wield that, frankly, for pennies on the dollar, had such an incredible impact.
That retreat opens the door for others, like China.
And to be very honest, the money we spend on prevention is so much less than it is on the other end, whether it's domestically or overseas, So couldn't agree more.
Interesting. It's interesting hearing about how your guys' perspectives on these different topics and different issues, especially with people that are so good in their field. I was curious though, and I wanted to learn a little bit about how you guys got your start in your respective fields. I know, David, you came out of the CIA right out of college, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about that, the experience of kind of transferring from undergrad to a government position in the intelligence community.
Sure, I'll kick it off here. I may be somewhat unusual. I knew I wanted to be a spy since I was in middle school. I don't know why. I watched the movies and stuff, and that's what I always want to do. My personality is such, I'm very discreet. People tend to trust me, and it seemed like a natural fit. And then I was okay with languages, so for that reason. I never told anybody at all, including my family, that that's what I wanted to do, but I sort of did my best to be in an environment where I might bump into intelligence officers in Washington, and that's exactly what I did. And then I basically did my best to get in. I tried, I failed the first time. I was rejected the first time. I applied as an analyst. In fact, I didn't even know that someone with my ethnic background, as white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, could be a directorate of operations case officer. I didn't think that was possible. I didn't understand that, yes, that is true. I was thinking about an asset. It's just, I didn't have the education to do that. So long story short is, I knew early on, and then I did what I could. I studied abroad. I learned a foreign language. That's hard. In my case, it was Chinese. I worked abroad, and I wanted to make myself attractive to what I thought the agency needed, which was people who could take initiative, were discreet, were trustworthy, and could basically operate in hard environments. So I'll stop there.
All right. Karen or Dexter, do you guys have anything to add on this question?
What do you got, Karen?
I always have something to add. I think one of the things I will just make a pitch, because I think the point that David made is really an important one, that I think people can't always imagine themselves, particularly in the operational roles. And I think that's particularly true of women. So I just want to take a moment to do a shout out for women who are interested in national security, because I didn't come, unlike Jason Bourne or James Bond, I came with no special skill sets. I had graduated from the University of Virginia. I did well. But I did not come out with any military experience. The first time I ever picked up or even saw a weapon up close was when I was in my training, our military familiarization through the agency. I knew very little or had very little appreciation, because remember, this is pre-internet. This is before people were writing books every other week about what the business was all about. So you were really it was much more difficult than it is now. There was certainly no CIA website where you could go on and read job descriptions. So a lot of it you're sort of putting together in your mind. And I did have the good fortune of being a brat. I had grown up overseas, and so I already had the exposure. I spoke a language. I had lived outside of the United States, and I knew I wanted to continue to live outside the United States. So that was a huge bonus. But I would just encourage people to understand that there is no expectation that you come in with a specific skill set. They, in fact, look for diversity of talent, diversity of experience, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of gender, because all of our targets are so diverse. And once you are in the organization, they focus an incredible amount of time on the front end in training you so that you are properly equipped to do the job. So don't second guess yourself. Don't self-select out. If it's something you think you might be interested in, please apply, because I promise you, they will tell you if they don't think you're qualified, and they will train you with the skills that you need to possess.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think that it's important now more than ever that organizations recruit based on diversity, but they hire based on merit. And I think that that's super important. I look at what Dave and what Karen has said. Dave always wanted to be in the agency, and Karen, she was a brat growing up overseas. I was a Navy brat. My dad was in the Navy. He was a cryptologic enlisted and officer. And so that's kind of what I knew. And one of the reasons I started in network was to kind of reach out to folks and let them see their opportunities that they'd never thought of, people they've never seen doing something except on TV and in books. So when we go out to schools and we talk to kids, I try to be extremely personable, make sure I'm not any different than you. I'm not special. What I've done is really followed my passion. I stayed teachable, and I connected with people on the human level. And I think all those things, when you combine them, they make you do your job well, and then opportunities present themselves based on that. And sticking with things, not giving up. You're going to hear no a lot in your life. Things aren't easy. The things that we do can be tough. I've spent more time in safe houses, and I've been blown up, and I'm sure they have their stories. And, it is what it is, but I wouldn't trade it. So if this is something you want to do, I encourage you to join Sycamore, join in network, and talk to us, because all of us are approachable. We all love mentoring.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add. Karen and I come out of the same ilk, the same background, right? And I'll say this: when I applied to the agency, I applied to 5 other different places. I applied to the Navy, I applied to the State Department, I applied to the FBI, the Secret Service, like whatever, and I probably would have been happy with any of them. In fact, I did join the Navy later on, which was a wonderful experience. But if it's as an analyst, if it's as a science and tech person, if it's there's 100. I used to play a game with my kids actually and say, think of a job, and I bet the CIA has that job somewhere. Any job you can think, teacher, whatever it is. So yeah, really, the skills. What makes us strong is the strength of all that we have. And please never think that, oh well, I don't speak the language yet, or I don't do this, or I never lived overseas. It doesn't matter. You can get there, and there's so many things you can do: operations, analyst, whatever.
And I mean, listening to all of this, if I combine all of you guys' experience and then as well the respective agencies that you guys worked at, it's truly incredible. And I think it opens up a door for a question which I think is pressing for many people that want to enter within this field. And that is, how do you see the nature of talent and recruitment currently? And how do you feel that it has changed within the CIA, FBI, Department of Defense, and the State Department. So maybe we can start with Karen.
I think this generation's a lot smarter. No question about it. Much more technologically focused. You guys grew up on your phones and your computers in a way, I literally used my first computer when I was typing a term paper in my third year in college. That was the first time I had ever used a computer. So wrap your brain around that. And you guys can't conceive of a world in which you haven't grown up this way. I think that has huge implications for the kinds of people that are recruited. So I think there's huge pluses to that. I think you guys are very intuitive. And I think that most intelligence going forward is going to have a component of technology. It is impossible to do anything in this day and age without technology. So being able to leverage that more effectively and being open and creative in a way that probably our generation, well, I know our generation was not capable of, is really important. I would say, having done a lot of mentoring, having done a lot of work with young people, what I see lacking a little bit more is the interpersonal skills, some of those soft skills that just by virtue of how we grew up and the experiences that we had as young people, I see that is more of a challenge for this generation. It's not a showstopper, but for example, for someone like me who grew up as an operations officer, and don't misunderstand me, this doesn't mean as an operations officer you have to be an extrovert, but you still have to know how to engage with people. I mean, Dave's shaking his head because Dave and I joke about this. He's much more of the introvert. I'm the extrovert, but both of us are effective in different ways. The bottom line is, though, you have to have an intellectual curiosity. You're going to have to get your butt off the couch, because for all of the technology that's out there, nothing replaces that exquisite human that we often talk about, that rarefied air. And it is rarefied because there's not a lot that's really exquisite. And so finding that nugget, that one source, that one, report that they can provide that tells you not just what happened or what will happen, but why, or what the plans are and intentions are, is what we're all about. And so I would say, there's incredible challenges and opportunities that await you. And I would say that being well-rounded is the name of the game. And I would argue that's true of any career, regardless of how technology forward we are in this generation.
I like that very much. So Dexter, why don't we go with you next?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Karen. I think that, me growing up, I think of myself 10 miles away from my house without a cell phone, with my buddies on my bike. My parents had no idea where I was, and that taught me a lot. I'm navigating life and figuring things out. And as I travel the world and kind of blend in different situations and adapt and think quick on my feet, it's saved me many times. I think that if I didn't have the interpersonal skills, whether it's humor, whether it's just the ability to adapt on a dime many times, and then be able to kind of pick up on certain situations. I've been in situations many times where you might be very close to death, in the sense of, let's say you're 30 seconds away, but you don't know it yet. You don't see it, and the folks around you don't see it. And you kind of got to say something's about to happen unless we change course now, unless we make a difference now. And that kind of came from life experience, I think, just not being in denial a lot of times. I do, though, agree that you guys are so smart. I think the competition is so amazing. I look at the young people that I mentor and the languages they speak and the organizations. I have 2 interns in our organizations that started their own organization, and they're leaders, and they're still in undergrad. And it just blows my mind. So I think the future looks extremely bright. I think this is a tough time, and I'm sure we'll get into it later. But, with the hiring freeze and with folks on probation being let go, and folks trying to graduate and start fellowships and internships, and those being put on hold, and then fellowships that were supposed to be 2 years that were cut off 6 months before they ended, all those things are extremely tough. And I think the folks that are graduating now are going to deal with one of the most competitive and tough times to kind of start their careers. But the folks that occupy that time with things that make them better, whether it's learning languages, writing papers and publishing them. I spoke to one person who's going to spend 2 years in Dominican Republic in the Peace Corps. All these things fill those gaps and make you more marketable. So don't give up, stick with it. And again, your future looks bright.
David, please.
Yeah, just a little bit of a different tack on some things to add. You all are great. We all know that. Think about what our adversaries are doing. How are they trained? What are they studying? You know, in terms of tech or whatever else. And in many cases, we're behind them. So yes, I think that the CIA, FBI, all those national security agencies, they're not going to have a recruitment quota problem. Like they're going to hit their numbers, fine, and they're going to hit it with talented people. But keep in mind what the adversary has, and that's who you're going to be working against. So that's the first thing. And then the other point I want to make is, and I agree with everything that Dexter and Karen has said, but the other point I want to make is the CIA in particular does not have a recruitment problem, but it does have a retention challenge. At least it did when I was there. And it's a hard job. It's a very hard job. It's demanding, it's emotional, it's a lot. So do keep that in mind. I think that the CIA could do, I think the CIA could do a lot better when it comes to retaining its people, and hopefully they've done that in the years that I've been away. But know that know that that's part of it. Know that that's part of the whole thing. Karen had the great fortune of going into the most senior ranks of the agency, both operations and then on the executive side. And not many people can do that. So I would really more look to Karen to talk about those issues there.
All right, Ethan.
Yeah. So I was curious, you talked about the adversaries that we're going to be facing. How should we as students prepare to face those adversaries? And how should we expect, and how could we prepare to maybe not only get the job, but also stay in the job? Because like you said, there's a retention problem. So how should we best prepare ourselves for, we being undergrads, prepare ourselves for federal work?
You want to go first, Dex?
Sure. So, I think there's certain things, this kind of ties to the last question a little bit. When I was coming up, and David and Karen both kind of touched on this, there was a mental health piece that wasn't addressed. Issues related to PTSD, issues related to trauma weren't discussed. In the 80s and 90s, I enlisted in 1989. There were certain things that you would talk to your doctor about that you wouldn't want to get put in your medical files because you didn't want to get disqualified. And it's different now. But it was that way before. I mean, 80s, 90s, it was a different time. I think that, there's still a need for resilience. There's still a need for kind of toughness, but also having support networks where you can kind of talk through issues is super important. I think I even forgot the topic that I was going on because this is so important to me. But I just got kind of off loop a little bit. I apologize, Ethan. What was the original topic that I was supposed to talk about?
I was just curious about how undergrads should prepare for work in the intelligence community and in the national defense community. You mentioned it earlier that some of your interns had started organizations. So that's something that the national security that the intelligence community and national security agencies look for. Should I go out as an undergrad and found 10 organizations? Is that the good number I should reach for about 10 student organizations?
I don't think it's a number aspect. I do think that Sycamore is just one of those organizations. You look at David when he started Sycamore a few years back and how it's carried over now with Ariana. Those are key things. I look at Josh, who's one of our interns. he created a nonprofit focusing on the Middle East. I have Ghazal, who created a nonprofit called Fed Insight, where she has federal officers coming to George Mason and talking to students. They're not doing this so it looks good on the resume. You know, most of the things you do, it's because they help other people and you also benefit from it. So I think that's super important. So just finding things to fill the gap. If something doesn't happen in your time frame, it's okay. It wasn't meant to be. If you start something 5 years after college or 10 years after college, that's okay too. You're not in competition with anybody. Just be the best you can be. I always tell people, I know who I am. I don't think I'm better or worse than anybody else, but I know who I am. And I love kind of the competition of going for something, whether it's some special training or a job or whatever it may be. And if I get it, wonderful. If I don't get it, what can I do better? So that's my answer.
I would just piggyback off that, and I would hit 3 points. One, which goes back to what David said earlier, which is, you know, you want to be your best, and you want to be as effective as you can possibly be in the national security infrastructure. Then you got to understand the challenges that are facing our country, who our adversaries are, what makes them tick. So I would say number one is education, right? You're doing that right now. Continue to do it. You know, people, I always say to people, excel where you are, and then, you know, that will help you get to your next step. Don't always be focused on your next step. You know, actually mark time, be present where you are, learn and absorb as much as you can, especially for those of you that are in target-rich environments like the Washington, D.C. area. There is such a plethora of material and opportunities out there to participate in fora, to jump, and even those of you who aren't local, there's so many podcasts. You are literally hearing from people who did nothing but this kind of work their entire careers, and you can listen to their podcasts where they will tell you, you know, so much about the Iranian target or the Russian target or the Chinese target. So I would say be intellectually curious and make sure that you are staying on top of not just the obvious, you know, the nation state actors that we're most concerned about, but also I think you guys are going to be faced with a lot of interesting challenges that we are just starting to witness the rise of. Things like pandemics, things like fights for natural resources that are going to result in, you know, climate change that results in fight for natural resources that results in, you know, huge refugee populations that then translate to national security. So you're starting to see these huge trends. And I think at your peril, you're not watching that. The move away from globalization towards populism. That's scary as hell, not just in this country, but worldwide. We're seeing that everywhere. And that should terrify everyone. So I think education, bar none, number one, top of your list. Stay smart, stay intellectually curious, and always challenge your assumptions about everything. Number two, resilience. David alluded to this before, but most people that apply, at least for the agency, the first time they get in, don't actually get hired. So to Dexter's point, what does that mean? You know, the beauty is, I alluded to this before, everything's online now. So you can look and see, okay, what are the jobs I'm most interested in? I'm most passionate about? What are the things that they believe? You know, they'll tell you more often than not, hey, we're looking for somebody, you know, that has this kind of background. Or, you know, if you bring languages to the table, if you bring an expertise in a particular area, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what those areas are where you might want to concentrate, right? In terms of regional expertise. So I would say finding opportunities to, whether it's organizations, internship, you know, I'm a huge believer in internships because seeing something up close, having a peek behind the tent is incredible, because remember, it's not just them interviewing you, you're interviewing them. Not everybody's cut out for this line of work. So you get, you know, you have the opportunity through internships to potentially get a front row seat to see whether the organization you think you want to dedicate your life to is really the right fit. And then I can't remember, and I thought I wrote it down, but I did not. I had a third point that I'm sure was stunningly brilliant, but I'm going to leave it at that, and David will probably say it for me.
I hope so, Karen. Sure. And I'll just say, Dexter, I love your office in the background and all the things there. And one of the things, we'll talk about it sometime, all the things that are there. I'm sure one thing I can't see, though, is your bookshelf. I can see Karen's bookshelf, and you all can see my bookshelf. And the first thing I'm going to say is, read. Read a lot. Read a lot. As Karen said, I can't think of any job where someone hasn't written a memoir about it. You want to know about what the job is? There's literally books that tell you what the job is like. So, the majority of the books behind me here are spy stories, because that's what I was interested in. So read is the first one. The next one is, gotta say it, but sort of the straight and narrow path. If you get into trouble, drugs, or whatever, the government does not have time for that, right? So if you're going to be dedicated to it, then start living it right now, okay? The next is specialize. I would specialize in something that you're passionate about. For me, it was China. Maybe you want to learn more about Iran or, North Korea, whatever it is. But until recently, if you had some burning desire to learn about Canada, I would say you probably not think, that's national security is not for you. But, whatever. Pick something that you think would be interesting for you to really spend some time delving into, because when you're in front of an adversary, it's that accumulation of knowledge that you have built up over the years that they will see in you, so that they know he understands what I'm going through. So that intern, I couldn't agree more. Intern every place you can, because that will either, it's like a yes or a no. You'll figure it out, and no matter what, it's a great experience. I've said before, live and work overseas. I think that's good for people in general, but I think it's critical for national security professionals. And a language matters also. And typically I would tend to be interested in those that you think would be, concerning in the national security space. So, and then the last thing, I know I said it before, but dedication. A lot of, applying to the agency, back then, it took me almost 2 years to get in. And I applied to many other places. At the time that I got in, I was working at the Pentagon, but that was what I wanted to do. So I got the call from the agency, and within 10 minutes, I walked to my boss's office at the Pentagon. I said, "Hey, listen, I'm out of here," and that's what it was. I was also very young, and the agency was paying me a regular salary that I wanted. That was great. It does get harder, though, I think, as you get older, because it's still the government. You're not going to make millions of dollars. And if you're working at, I don't know, Goldman Sachs or something like that, and then the agency says, or anyone in the federal government is like, "Hey, you're going to be a GS6, which is, I don't know what it is now, $60,000, $70,000 a year. It's hard to take that pay cut. But they want people who are like, "Yeah, I will be there Monday. And I know it's Friday, but I'll be there Monday and I'll make it work," because they have a long list of people that all want the job. So I think that dedication is part of it. I'll stop there. Hopefully I hit your point, Karen.
You did. It was the security one. So well done.
Well, especially in social media. Like, we didn't grow up with social media. Everything you guys do, people are posting, and that's scary.
Yeah, for sure.
David, I wanted to add on what you were saying. I think that's a very good advice. First, read, I think, is very important, right? There's so many books nowadays, like you mentioned, about every single topic. And as well, Dexter, maybe he wants to mention it, but soon there might be a potential book that Dexter's going to author, not only about careers within national security, learning about the different resources that one can have access to, but also the history of the whole field. So that's just a small peek I wanted to give for the audience, which maybe Dexter can talk about in a second. So my next question is directed to you, Karen. So you've led, as I've read, various operations across conflict zones. what characteristics do you look for if you could choose a certain person for these high-risk assignments?
That's a really good and interesting question. And I honestly will say it depends. And I hate to say that, but it really does depend, because there are very different skill sets. I mean, clearly the language piece is a no-brainer. If you can ever have someone on site that's a natural Arabist, or can speak Farsi, or, whatever it is, regardless of the target you're going after. I would say language is huge, because there are so many things in communication that get lost through a translator, and using translators in these conflict zones. It's a necessary evil, but I found it to be incredibly frustrating. It's also a huge vulnerability. So I would say a language skill is always huge. I think we talked about this before, but resiliency and adaptability, thinking quickly on your feet. A war zone, interestingly enough, is not really, and in some ways it can be less complicated than a counterintelligence threat zone, because in a war zone, you tend to be surrounded, you tend to have protection. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not at risk, of course, but you're usually traveling with a team of people surrounding you, and you're in an armored vehicle, and you're doing movements and things that have been planned out. When you're operating on your own in a hostile counterintelligence environment, it's a very different dynamic, but you still need a lot of those same skills. Like you have to be hyper vigilant, someone who is noticing everything, somebody who the attention to detail is critical. Your ability to make, as Dexter alluded to this before, so many of us grew up as kids on the streets because that's what you did in our generation. You learn to start to recognize if something looks right, if it doesn't look right. You've spent so much time on the streets that you're learning, okay, what does not feel good about this? What do I need to do? And more often than not, it's not about hunkering down and, staying on the X and trying to take the terrorists out. It's to get the hell out of Dodge, right? The whole training that we receive in places like a war zone is anticipate the threat and then get the hell out of there. Whereas in a counterintelligence environment, that's not always the answer. And sometimes it can be abort, but sometimes it's, hey, you got to just figure out a different way to get from point A to point B. So there's so many variables involved, but I would say, just generally speaking, it's going to be, somebody who's very resilient, somebody who, I would also say, you need people that work well in teams. Unlike a lot of our work on the streets in traditional operational environments, you don't work with teams. You're usually solo, you're on your own. So, if you're not a huge team player, not as big of a deal. If you're in a war zone and you're on top, when I was helped set up our base in Kandahar, there were 6 of us. We slept 8. I mean, we were literally all on top of each other. It was me and 5 other guys. And if you could not figure out how to get along with these people, you were dead in the water. You just cannot, you don't have time for, I'm not suggesting we all were, blissfully engaged every minute of the day, but you have to have people that are professional, that can be cool under pressure and can be adaptable. So I'm sorry that's not a great answer, but that's because it really does depend on the kind of threat. Latin America was so different, the high threat zones there, and the war on drugs was very different than my experiences. Even Iraq and Afghanistan were so different. So it's just each scenario can call for very different expertise.
Yeah, and just one quick story, because it's a great story. Adaptability too is a big part of it. I remember an operation where one of my colleagues was a tall blonde woman. She's a tall blonde woman. She spoke perfect Chinese, and we had an operation in Africa that required someone to meet this source in Africa, and we sent her. The problem is she sort of stuck out like a sore thumb in that area. But when we thought about it for a little bit, someone finally said, why don't we just turn her into an African man and then do the operation that way? And that's what she did. So to have someone with the skills who can travel across the world, carefully, I don't want to say more than that, they travel across the world, have different garb of a country where she's never been before, look like she is not a Caucasian woman, but an African man, and then debrief an asset in Mandarin Chinese. That's a pretty strong skill set. So
Hey, the burqa was my friend.
that's right.
You can't tell anything about someone. Even the guys wore burqas.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't matter where I am, whether it's Morocco or Afghanistan or Puerto Rico, I blend in, right? And when I'm in when I'm in Afghanistan and I'm dressed like a local, I'm out there with my local national, but it's just me and him, and nobody else knows I'm an American. And I might be, within half a mile of 50 Taliban, warlords, leaders, and I'm there doing my thing. But what I look for in people is kind of a little different. I think I look for somebody who's not selfish, who's not that I deserve or me kind of mentality, who's like, where can I contribute? How can I contribute? And I love people that have extra. And when I say extra, in 2006, I hired somebody, the person was brilliant, but I had a bunch of brilliant people to hire from. And this person was captain of the UCLA water polo team. And I was like, that takes guts, that takes something. And just recently, and she just left as a 15 government. So, she was that person I expected her to be. I could put her in any environment and she excelled. I had an intern who was a world-class ice climber last year. And I picked him because of that. He was equal with everybody else, but he had that extra thing. And what he went on to do was, after his internship, he started a nonprofit in Central Asia focused on ice climbing and everything he learned at the State Department to engage the locals. And these special things you can see sometimes in people when everything's equal. So I say language is great, travel's great, humility is great, being teachable is great, but have that thing that's you. And I think that'll take you a far way too, a long way.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time, but reliability and dependability, that's what I need that, and everything else is secondary. But you have to have someone you can count on.
Yeah. Very good. Ethan, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. So you talked about what type of things make people stand out to the government. What makes the government stand out, or what should make the government stand out to people that are interested in it? Like, what sets it apart from working in, say, private or NGO, I guess, industries?
Karen?
There's no greater honor. There's no greater cause. There's no greater mission than serving your country. It sounds trite, but honest to God, 26 years. And I am as passionate about my career. For personal reasons, I ended up making the decision to step out after 26. Were circumstances different, I'd probably still be in government. But I continue to look for ways to give back. And in particular, I look for opportunities like this to mentor, because I do think that there is no amount of money, and I will say it's gotten better, David, so you'd be happy to know, across the board, we pay better, we support our families better, there's better mental health. It is not the agency we used to serve in. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It's government with all of its foibles, but it is some of the most dedicated, passionate, and brilliant people that I have ever worked with. And as I said, I just don't think that there is a better cause. And I would argue now more than ever, we need people in government who have a strong moral compass, who continue to believe in the ideals of this country, democracy. And, I just think, I just think that there is no better place as a young person to grow and make an impact in the world than working for the government.
Dave?
Yeah, I agree. Mission is the main thing, the word that I wrote down. Doing something that's bigger than yourself. you also have to feel, and I did, that what we were doing was on the right side of history. You know, I disagreed with what the terrorists were doing. Some people, you know, different opinions, but I disagreed. I disagreed with some of the things that our other adversaries were doing. So I truly believe that my efforts were on the right side of history. I feel I sleep very well at night, knowing that the things that I did contributed to our security. And then the other thing, again, it's another story, but it's important to tell it, I think. There was a time when I was operational. I was in the middle of Southeast Asia. It was late at night, maybe midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning, and I was going to meet a terrorist. I was in an underground parking lot. I was gluing on my mustache and wig and, you know, all the things to disguise myself. I had a vest and other protective gear, and I caught a glimpse of myself in a car's side view mirror, and I said, "What the hell are you doing? What a strange thing that here my family's back home, and I'm here doing this, putting myself in danger." It's a great opportunity. As Karen said, it's a tremendous honor. And where else on earth will you have those kinds of experiences? To go to these places, to see the sort of thing, to meet the type of people that you'll meet. I would really say, I really think only government can afford someone that opportunity. And as a 20 and a 30-year-old, you know, I had those opportunities to meet with those people and to do these operations, and it was a tremendous honor. So,
yeah, I agree. I look at the service piece, and it's second to none. But there's the travel and the, you know, the unknown sometimes, working with people in very tough situations where you're really depending on each other. All those things kind of mattered. I mean, you know, I remember years ago, it's probably 15 years ago, one of my contractors was with me, and he was like, "Wow, you have this black passport, and here you are doing classified work in Central Asia, and when you walk into the hotel, people treat you differently." And I never picked up on those kind of things, but once he said that to me, I was like, I guess he's kind of right. You know, last year I was in Mongolia. I never thought I was going to be in Ulaanbaatar, you know, the coldest capital in the world, sitting there representing the U.S. government at the head of the table, where I'm being served, you know, sheep brain and horse and bone marrow, and everybody's looking at me, and I got to eat it all because I'm representing the U.S. government, right? That's an adventure. That's a story. There were other things that I was doing on that mission, and some of it was countering Russian disinformation, right? Because Mongolia is very close to Russia. But everybody was looking at me, and I had to be that guy who just kind of dug in. Maybe I had an extra shot of vodka, but that sheep brain went down.
I like that story very much. Yeah, especially you mentioned to me once, Dexter, that it was cooked in a tablecloth or sheet, a bed sheet, right? So that is just outstanding, right?
That was a goat in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's a different story even. So look, I will ask the last question, then we will open up shortly for the Q&A. So you three, I guess, from the ideas I heard, are very creative and look at and analyze the circumstances that we're experiencing at the moment, and also think potentially how we can improve recruitment, right? So I'd like to ask each one of you, if you could implement one reform in how we recruit and retain national security professionals, what would it be and why? Maybe, Dexter, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to go ahead.
You know, I kind of said this. I would recruit for diversity and hire on merit. So that means I would widen the pool and go places, whether they're inner cities or rural places. When I say diversity, I don't just mean color. I don't just mean gender. I'm talking about, I want folks from Alaska. I want folks from North and South Dakota, as well as Miami and LA. I think that's super important, because the more experiences we have, the better informed we are when we sit in these rooms and we're making recommendations. There have been times in my life I thought about leaving government, and you know, maybe I wasn't happy with something that was important to me, and I kind of weighed the consequences. And I think about the times where I've been in the room where we were going to do something, and I got to say, hold on a second. And I explained my thought process, and it's something nobody else thought of. And it probably saved some lives in the end. And we ended up not going down that road. And if you're not in the room, Karen's not in the room, if Dave's not in the room, if you guys aren't in the room when you get these positions, to add to that level of input based on your experiences, something's missing there. And I think that's really, really important.
I would have probably two. One would be, and fortunately, this has been a huge drive, and I think it's gotten better. It's still not perfect, but I think we lose entirely too many quality candidates just with the protracted hiring process. People that simply cannot wait 2 years to find out whether or not they're going to be given a conditional offer of employment. So I would say we're getting better at that with expediting the background checks, being smarter about how to use technology to our advantage to be able to get these young people through the system more quickly. So I think we need more of that and more thoughtful planning. I mean, my number one would have been what Dexter said, which is DEI, because I know it's a bad word in this day and age, but frankly, as someone who grew up fighting for a lot of that change in the workplace, I saw it as change for good. I think it is really to the detriment of this country to label people who are DEI as lacking merit, because that is simply just not the case. But that's we could have a whole entire panel on that, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. The other thing I would say is mid-career hires. I wish we could be smarter about how we bring people in and out. And I'm, as someone who's been in senior leadership positions at both the agency and FBI, I recognize a lot of the hurdles, but I think anything, if it's worth doing, you just got to figure out how to do it. And we lose so many people. To Dexter's point, there are people who have very legitimate reasons for needing to step out of government for a time and then possibly come back. We have not figured out how to be agile enough as a government to allow a more fluid flow of careerists in and out of their respective departments and agencies. And I appreciate some of those challenges. I think if we're serious about getting the best team on the field, we've got to be a lot smarter than that, because we want some of our young people to go out and have private sector experience and then come back and use what they've learned out, in private industry to the betterment of, whether it's technological operations, whether it's just trade craft, whatever it is, we've got to figure out how to be more agile. So I think those would be my two things.
What I wrote down here, I wrote trust down here. I think we could do a better job at, the concept of trust and bringing more people on. I know we've done tremendously well when it comes to hiring diverse candidates, and because you want people who natively speak Farsi, who natively speak Korean and Chinese and Russian. But if they natively speak those languages, well, guess what? They probably have family members back in those countries. And I think the government, the agency, has a problem trusting people like that to say, well, wait a minute, are your loyalties to us? Are they to the home country? And yes, there's always a counterintelligence threat. Yes, it has to be looked at, but I think we could do better there. So that's that. And then on the way out, retention, same thing, trust. It's difficult when bad things happen. And I honestly asked an FBI agent once, I said, did you ever think about coming over to us? And he said, absolutely not. You guys eat your own. And, it was a little bit of in jest, but what he was talking about was the rigorous attention that we give to our own people. And it's not always good to make sure that no one is stepping out of line, because we've been burned very badly in the past. We don't want this to continue happening. So obviously, when you sign up for this, you sort of say, yes, you can look into my life. I don't have any expectation of privacy, and on and on and on. But I think that we need to do a lot better when it comes to trust, because I think a lot of people end up leaving because they say, you know what, forget it. If after all these years you still have questions about my loyalty, I'm out. And I would hope we would do better there.
I think that's very good, David. That word trust, I think, is very important. And so I'd like to open up now the Q&A. I'd ask anyone who potentially has a question or wants to learn more about something with these three very good experts. So please put in your question in the chat, or if you want, you can even say it through your microphone, but through chat would be preferred, and we can ask the questions now. Dalia, please.
Hello, and thank you. I want to say, first of all, what an inspiring podcast. I especially with you, Ms. Schaefer, as a fellow Navy brat, your words uplifted me in my pursuit of this career path. I wanted to ask, this is directed to you, David. You mentioned a lot about encountering enemy forces and learning what they're training themselves to do in order to either match them where they are or even supersede that. How would there ever be an opportunity to meet them in an effort that could facilitate peace, even in small measures, through training as they train? Has there ever been any sort of proof of that, or possibility of it even?
So I think that yes, but I would look frankly to Dexter, and I would look to the State Department and our diplomatic colleagues to talk about that sort of a thing. The CIA, the one place you cannot work for before, if you work at the CIA, is you can never be in the Peace Corps, and that's just how it goes. That just wasn't my function. My function wasn't, let's try to get along. My function was, I'm going to recruit you and do damage to your country. And was that the best outlook? I think so for me. Yes, I do. We have other people who are better at negotiating and diplomacy. Not to say that you don't forge friendships with the people that you're sitting across from. I had tremendously intimate friendships with them, but at the end of the day, many of them are trained to do damage to us, and my job was to protect the country. Welcome any other thoughts, Dexter, Karen?
Yeah, for me, I have the benefit of working for the State Department and forging these relationships and building trust. I was leading coalitions. I got to lead the global coalition to combat nuclear terrorism. I got to lead the global coalition to defeat ISIS. And when I'm in these coalitions and I'm talking to my counterparts in Italy or Morocco or Spain or wherever it may be, what I say matters, and building things with them matter, not just kind of springing things on them at the last second, but seeing value in their input. I remember talking to the ambassador from France, and she was like, Dexter, promise me you're not leaving Syria anytime soon. And I said, no, we are not going anywhere. And then a week and a half later, the president said, we're leaving Syria. And then Secretary of Defense resigned, and the head of the Defeat ISIS Coalition resigned. She understood that wasn't the plan. She understood that I gave her the best information I could at the time, and she still trusted me. And that kind of relationship goes a long way, I think. So for me, it's about people, and I get to not only get the job done, protect whatever secrets we need to protect, but I get to really kind of connect with my counterparts. And that even means, folks, that we as a country don't always see eye to eye on. There's something that's built there, and it goes a long way when it comes to me walking in the room and people seeing me and saying, it's Dexter. All right, we know we're going to get the honest scoop now.
Yeah, and sorry, I have one more point because my answer was incomplete. Not to say that even with adversarial forces, there aren't ways to work together. There are, and we do. Okay, it's often called a liaison relationship, right? Even when we are meeting with some of our most adversarial countries, we can find areas of joint concern, if it's terrorism, if it's something else. And I do think we work well with that. So there is a cooperative relationship that is built in. Most of my experience was on the other side of it, a little bit more adversarial, but I wanted to add that point because I neglected to say it before. Please,
Yeah, I would just jump on that, David. And it's a lot, Dahlia, since you come from a Navy background, it's going to look a lot like our relationships with liaison. I equate a lot to sort of the soft, special forces approach to train, advise, assist. We do a tremendous amount with local liaison. Not surprisingly, despite what you see in most movies, the agency, if we do things unilaterally, it's, the Davids of the world doing them as a singleton, very quietly and discreetly. Any idea that, the CIA shows up in force with sort of this legion of paramilitary people and starts hitting the ground running, it's absurd. It simply does not happen. But what we do to great effect, and I had a lot of experience with this just starting my career in Latin America, because we did so much with our partners there, and they always, they would take the lead. So I think that there are just tremendous examples of us doing that with these liaison partnerships, which is probably why I'm such a big believer in the importance of alliances and the importance of these partnerships, because I don't think for a second that the United States can defeat a China without NATO. I don't think for a second the United States is even in a position to manage hostilities with Russia, simultaneously managing all of the other conflicts without the support of NATO. I think that there are just so many layers to that. And I would say that, intelligence, yes, our job is absolutely to recruit that exquisite source that will provide us the plans and intentions of that government. And in many instances, it's been that exquisite intelligence that has been able to forestall all-out aggression between countries. So, I see it much like David. I see it as, it is not diplomacy per se, but it is certainly something that is, and in particular covert action, which we haven't touched on at all, but that's the president's third option, right? And that's short of war. The idea is, okay, we do not want to have to go full on, head-on conflict with country X, but we have certain threats that we are facing from a particular region, and we need to neutralize those threats. So how do we do that? So I think it gives the president and his administration a level of nuance in their choices that they would not get with simply at the one end diplomacy, at the other end DOD.
Very interesting. If anyone else has a pressing question, please send in the chat. If not, I would say we went a bit over time, but I think it was well worth it sitting down with you all. So first, thank you very much. I think it was very insightful. Thank you all for joining as well. And I wish you all a very pleasant evening.
Thank you. It's been
Thank you all for having us.
a lot of fun.
Yes, I
thank you for the
agree.
opportunity.
Anytime with you two august gentlemen. Take care, guys.
We have a great group. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.